Today, we're going to be talking about a dream. We started this study in the second chapter of Daniel last week, and we're going to finish today with a dream and the interpretation that Daniel brings to that dream. We're also going to talk about an important lesson for Bible study. That is, we want to study what it actually says, not what we think it says, not what we hope it says, and stick with what the word actually says. And we're going to be talking about that in detail when we talk about Nebuchadnezzar's dream today, when we come right back. Hi, and welcome to Bible Study with Friends, where our goal is to help you get more impact from your Bible study. I'm here with my friend Kyle Grinstead, and Kyle and I are continuing our study in the book of Daniel. Today, we're going to be finishing the second chapter. This is the portion of Daniel where we get the interpretation of Nebuchadnezzar's dream. You remember last week, he had this dream that bothered him, and he put a death sentence out on the wise men because they couldn't tell him what the dream was and interpret it. We're going to pick up about verse 29, but before we do, I want to show us a specific phrase that's going to come up in the study through the rest of the chapter. And that's the phrase, God of heaven. Let me show you here. If you look back in chapter 2 at verse 18, this is when he goes to his three friends for prayer and he says, request compassion from the God of heaven. That's the first time in the book that phrase is used, but it's used often in the rest of the book. Again, in verse 19, then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Now, I want to watch that specific phrase here as we pick up the rest. Now, we pick back up in verse 28. This is where he's come before the king and he says, I can interpret the dream for you. And nobody on earth can do this for you. However, there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to the king what is going to take place in the latter days. This was your dream and the visions in your mind. And then he continues on. So I wanted to get this idea that all the way through here, when Daniel is interpreting dreams, and really all the way through the whole book, he is very careful to give credit to God and not take any credit on himself. This shows a humility of spirit, but it also shows a pattern where his whole life is really about giving God glory, and how we can see that as we go through here. Now, I'm going to have to stop because I've got one verse on a page. Then we got to switch pages again, but let me go back. All right. Read 28 and 29.
All right. However, there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will take place in the latter days. This was your dream and the visions in your mind while on your bed. As for you, O king, while on your bed, your thoughts turned to what would take place in the future. And he who reveals mysteries has made known to you what will take place.
Now, that's significant. In 29, it says, before I tell you the dream and the interpretation, the God of heaven has revealed to you the future and what's going to happen in the latter days in verse 28. And 29 says, this is about the future. Now, we're going to see that same exact phrase. In fact, while I switch pages here, flip down and look at verse 45 and read verse 45.
Verse 45. And just as you saw a stone being cut out of the mountain without human hands, and it shattered the iron, bronze, clay, silver, and gold, so the great God has told the king what will happen in the future.
Okay, you see that? So this is literally, this section of scripture is a future sandwich. You start with a verse where it says God has revealed to you the future, and it ends with a verse that says God has revealed to you the future. So I entitled today the dream statue of the future. And it's really about this dream that Nebuchadnezzar has and how Daniel is going to handle that dream. And it's all about the future. So we pick up. And the statue of history basically describes what the Bible calls the time of the Gentiles. This is going to be a statue revealing kind of the history of mankind up until the Messiah comes. And then things change, and we're going to see that today. And if you see this phrase in the New Testament, turn to Luke 21, verse 24.
They will fall by the edge of the sword and be led captive into all the nations. And Jerusalem will be trodden down by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled.
Okay, so there is a period of history that starts with the defeat of Jerusalem and the taking by Assyria first and Babylon, that starts a period where the Gentile kingdoms of the earth dominate Israel. And that ends when Messiah comes, and there is a fundamental switch in God's plan for the world. And in that verse in Luke, it talks about it's going to be, Jerusalem's going to be dominated until the time of the Gentiles is finished. So what this dream really is involved in is the entire scope of the times of the Gentiles in the world.
Okay.
Okay. And we're going to see that as we go here and take a look at that. Now, there's something very important that is a Bible study lesson that we need to learn as we read these verses. And let's go to it, and I'll talk it through as we go here. Go from verse 30 down to 31, those two verses.
All right. But as for me, this mystery has not been revealed to me for any wisdom residing in me more than in any other living man, but for the purpose of making the interpretation known to the king, and that you may understand the thoughts of your mind. You, O king, were looking, and behold, there was a single great statue. That statue, which was large and of extraordinary splendor, was standing in front of you, and its appearance was awesome. Yeah, the same kind of recognition that it's not him who's coming up with this. It's that it has been revealed.
He's making a point that it has been revealed, and that God is going to reveal something to Nebuchadnezzar. Now, as we look at this statue, we're going to ask the question of, why is this dream and interpretation here? Because we're going to see it really doesn't give us, the reader, very much information. This is all about Nebuchadnezzar, and it's about God making a point to Nebuchadnezzar. And you'll see that in 30, where it talks about God has revealed this to you. Let's look at that in detail. In the second half of verse 30, for the purpose of making the interpretation known to the king, that you may understand the thoughts of your mind. Could be your heart also, but the purpose of the entire dream is not to give prophecy to Israel or to give prophecy even to us. And I want to see that in a second. It is focused in on making a point to Nebuchadnezzar. You see where we're going?
Yeah.
Because he says the purpose is for you. Purpose of this whole thing. This is a pet peeve of mine, Kyle, that as we go through here, let's read this statue of history that we get starting up in verse 32 down to 36.
All right. The head of that statue was made of fine gold, its breast and its arms of silver, its belly and its thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You continued looking until a stone was cut out without hands, and it struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and crushed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed all at the same time and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away so that not a trace of them was found. But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This was the dream. Now we will tell its interpretation before the king.
Okay, now before we get into the interpretation, he basically fulfills the first part of the command from earlier. He said, remember the king said, I need a wise man to tell me not only the interpretation of the dream, but the dream.
Yeah.
So Daniel is fulfilling the first part. Here's your dream. This is what you dreamed. And it was this statue with the gold head, the silver chest, the bronze belly, the iron legs and the feet of iron and clay, right? That's what you dream. This awesome, amazing, huge statue is what you dream. Now he's going to get into the interpretation. And this is where you and I, as Bible students, need to be a little careful. I'll make
Okay.
that point as we go here. And I want you to make some comments. Okay, so he starts verse 36 with, this was the dream. Now we're going to tell you its interpretation to the king. This fulfills the second part of the death sentence that said, unless somebody can do this, I'm going to kill them all, right?
Yeah.
So let's start to read this and to go down. These are all about the future kingdoms. So let's read from verse 37 down to, let's go down to verse 41.
All right. You, O king, are the king of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, and the strength, and the glory. And wherever the sons of men dwell, or the beasts of the field, or the birds of the sky, he has given them into your hand and has caused you to rule over them all. You are the head of gold. After you, there will arise another kingdom inferior to you, then another third kingdom of bronze, which will rule over all the earth. Then there will be a fourth kingdom as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron crushes and shatters all things. Like iron that breaks in pieces, it will crush and break all these in pieces. In that you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it will be a divided kingdom, but it will have in it the toughness of iron, inasmuch as you saw the iron mixed with common clay.
All right. Now, notice in these verses, now, I just highlighted this. It starts out in 37 with, again, giving glory to the God of heaven has given you this kingdom. And then he says, he, that is the God of heaven, in verse 38, he has given them into your hands to rule. Okay. So it's all about focusing on God here. And then he says, you, because God has given you this kingdom, you're the golden head, right? And then he says, there's going to be another kingdom coming that is silver, and another kingdom that's bronze, and another kingdom that's iron. And then there's a mix of iron. The feet are iron and clay. Now, here's the question. Does he tell us or the king who these kingdoms are? I've listened to commentaries on the statue of history, and every one of them gets into, okay, this is the Medes and Persians, and then the next one is the Greeks, and the next one is Rome, and then Rome divides, and it's mixed. Ethically, it's strong, but morally, it's terrible. And then the dream continues. And I want us to notice that none of that is in this text. And God is he's perfectly able. In Isaiah, when God is prophesying to Jerusalem, he says specifically, Babylon is coming.
Yeah.
And he names Babylon. God is perfectly able in a prophecy to say, the Medes and Persians are coming. The Greeks are coming. The Romans are coming. In fact, later in the book of Daniel, we get the first couple of kingdoms specifically named. We get the Medes and Persians named, and we get the Greeks named. But he doesn't name the Romans, and he doesn't name any of the details of the mixed clay.
Interesting. Okay.
You see where my point goes here?
Yeah. So don't waste time on the parts that are more speculative that aren't in the text.
One of my favorite verses is Deuteronomy 29:29. It said, let the secret things of God remain secret, but the things revealed. So if God doesn't mention something in the scriptures, we got to be careful not to interpret into them. We want to know who these kingdoms are. Daniel, when he's talking to King Nebuchadnezzar, it doesn't matter, because what he's getting across to the king is your kingdom is not going to last forever. There's going to be other kingdoms, and it's all part of God's plan for the future. You're the kingdom now. You're the golden head. There's going to be another kingdom, and there's going to be a third kingdom, and there's going to be a fourth kingdom, and he doesn't mention who they are. So we got to be careful. If I'm doing a Bible study on this statue, what I've got to do is say, God is getting Nebuchadnezzar's attention with this dream and interpretation just to do two things. Number one, prove that he's God in heaven. And number two, to bring Daniel's status up in the kingdom.
Okay.
The lives of all the wise men. That's going to become important for the Christmas story as we get into it later. But this idea that we have to know who these kingdoms are, and it works for the Medes and the Persians, and then for the Greeks, because they're mentioned later in the book of Daniel. But when we start talking about Rome and start getting into this was XYZ BC to XYZ AD, and then these 2 feet, and it starts to get tough in
Okay.
our interpretation of those things. So let's stick with just what the Bible actually says, okay?
Yeah.
And we got to be careful. We do this all the time in the book of Revelation. We start to say, oh, this is what it says, but now this is what it means. We're so often wrong that we get embarrassed. So back to this prophecy, we can see clearly he doesn't name any names.
Yeah.
Now, the first kingdom later in chapter 5, verse 28 to 31, and in chapter 6, verse 8, it talks specifically about the Median Persian Empire. In chapter 8, verse 20 to 21, it talks about the Greek Empire coming next, as in the bronze. There's no mention of the Romans after that. So what I want to see is what the Bible actually says and why. Now, you have all these kingdoms coming. I put over here in my notes. You have all these kingdoms that are foretold. Nebuchadnezzar, your kingdom is not going to last forever. There's going to be another kingdom, and then there's going to be another kingdom, and then there's going to be another kingdom, and there's going to be one that is powerful. The iron crushes everything. It will crush and break all in pieces, verse 40. And then he says, and then I saw the feet and the toes, partly of potter's clay, partly of iron. It will be a divided kingdom. And all automatically they go, Rome was divided between East and West. And it will be strong and it will be brittle. Talking about the militarily strong and organizationally strong, but yet morally brittle. That's all well and good to talk about, but it's not in the scriptures. Following what I've said?
Yeah.
And it's a kind of a pet peeve of mine in these commentaries on these sets of verses. It gets all into the grass, into the details of who these kingdoms were and when they came and how long they served and all this. Daniel does not do that to the king. Now, where we get the real prophecy up to this point, all we've really had was this was the dream and this is what it means. There are going to be kingdoms coming. But there's no real prophecy about the future other than there's going to be a progression of human kingdoms, right?
Yeah.
We're going to get into what the real prophecy here, and this is a prophecy not only to Nebuchadnezzar, but if we listen to it, it's also a prophecy to us. So I want to pick that up in verse 44 and 45.
All right. In the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed, and that kingdom will not be left for another people. It will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms, but it will itself endure forever. And just as you saw a stone being cut out of the mountain without human hands, and it shattered the iron, bronze, clay, silver, and gold, so the great God has told the king what will happen in the future. The dream is true and its interpretation is trustworthy.
Okay. Now, what we see here is that in verse 44, it says, in those days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed, and that kingdom will last forever. Now, flip over to 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 16.
Your house and kingdom will endure forever before me, and your throne will be established forever.
So this is the promise. This is part of the Davidic covenant, the covenant between God and David, that God is going to establish the line of Messiah of this kingdom that will last forever. And it's talking about this. Now, what's interesting here, we can answer a question. I think we can answer a question. Why do the wise men show up in Matthew chapter 1 looking for the king of the Jews who was to be worshiped?
Are they looking at that, the throne that will be established forever? So are they looking toward this more everlasting?
There's going to be a kingdom that the God of heaven, all right, the God of Israel, the God of Daniel, that he sets up that's going to be forever. Now, later in Daniel, we're going to see there's going to be a star to watch for. But this is this idea that there's going to be a kingdom and a king that's going to last forever. So later, because of this interpretation, Daniel's life and the three friends' lives and all the lives of the wise men of Babylon were saved. Remember, they were under a death sentence.
Right.
And this interpretation saved their lives, literally. So in the future, they owe their lives and all their future families' lives to this God of heaven who sits up a kingdom that's going to last forever. And because of that debt, they're going to be watching for this king. And they know he's going to be the king of the God of Israel, the God of Jews, the God of Daniel. So it's an interesting thing here that right here, we begin to see the story. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense why Gentiles from a far off land would show up looking for the king of the Jews, and not only looking for the king of the Jews, but worshiping him. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. So they're repaying the debt that links directly back to the prophecy.
It all starts from this idea that there's going to be a kingdom set up with a king that will last forever. We see that in verse 44. And that's the real prophecy of this dream. That is, it goes above Nebuchadnezzar's head, but there's going to be a kingdom that's going to come. That kingdom is going to last forever. And that kingdom is going to crush all the other kingdoms. Very interesting. And it actually says that. So we're not interpolating here. We're answering some questions and saying, oh, okay, that starts to make sense. And it says, the great God, the last part of verse 45, I've made known to you what's going to take place in the future. And that's basically after this, after the five kingdoms, there's going to be this ultimate kingdom, right? Verse 46 says, then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face and did homage to Daniel and gave orders to present to him an offering and fragrant incense. The king answered Daniel and said, surely your God is a God of gods and a Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, since you have been able to reveal this mystery. Now, I want you to look at verse 44 and 46 and look for the details. In this interpretation, what does Nebuchadnezzar miss? What does he not get? Daniel gives him the dream, gives him the interpretation with the final prophecy that there's going to be an eternal king coming. So he says, but everything I've told you is true and valid. And Nebuchadnezzar then makes this pronouncement. What did he miss?
And are you pointing out the fact that he pays homage to Daniel himself? Is that
Yes, I am. Who was Daniel very careful to give the glory to?
The God of heaven.
The God of heaven. And yet Nebuchadnezzar doesn't get it. And he doesn't give the God of heaven his due of giving him glory. He honors Daniel. God uses that to heighten Daniel's position in the kingdom, yes. But it's important here that we see Nebuchadnezzar doesn't yet. God is going to deal with Nebuchadnezzar's heart in a while, but right now, Nebuchadnezzar doesn't get it. He hasn't all of a sudden said, oh, the God of the Jews is the God of gods, and he's the Lord of lords, and he's everything. Look what he says. Look at carefully what he says in that verse. Verse 47, surely your God is a God of gods. He doesn't say, my God is the God of gods. He says, your God, Daniel, is a God. They had a bunch of gods, so that's not saying a whole lot. And he's the God of gods and Lord of kings. He's amazing, and he's a revealer of mysteries. And I know that since you have been able to reveal this mystery. He just got done saying earlier, I can't reveal this mystery to you. The mystery's got to come from the God of heaven.
Yeah.
So we see clearly Nebuchadnezzar misses the point of not giving God, the God of heaven, the God that's going to fulfill this prophecy with these kingdoms. He's not giving him his proper glory.
Yeah. It's interesting to contrast, like you pointed out, the usages of the God of heaven
Yeah.
and the contrast between the God of heaven and a God of gods, a revealer of
Yeah.
mysteries. So,
And this idea of your God. Now, later,
yeah.
Nebuchadnezzar's heart's going to be dealt with, and his proclamation changes. But right now, this proclamation is just the proclamation of a guy who believes in a lot of gods, and there's a real powerful God that's Daniel's God. He has not internalized this at all. He's not saying, oh, God, this God is my God. No, he's saying this is
Yeah.
Daniel's God. And because of this God of Daniel, Daniel has given this prophecy. So all we get from that is that Nebuchadnezzar obviously misses the point. And then the last, go quickly to this last, the king promotes Daniel, gave him many great gifts, and he made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief prefect. That is, he's chief over all the wise men. And this is where the wise men start to get the information of who this God is, because Daniel is their boss. Daniel begins to reveal the book of Daniel to the wise men, so that ultimately the wise men are looking for the star of the eternal king that's going to crush all other kings. That makes sense?
That's a cool thread to trace.
And the fact that God uses this dream to bring Daniel to a point of honor and to put his three friends in a place of responsibility that's going to lead to some difficulties in the next chapter. But we're going to see in chapter 3 obvious proof that Nebuchadnezzar doesn't get it. He's told the dream, he's told the interpretation. The wise men are not killed. Daniel is put as the leader of the wise men, who will show up later. But Nebuchadnezzar himself doesn't get it yet. He's got some lessons to learn. And we'll pick up on that in chapter 3. Today we've been talking about Nebuchadnezzar's dream, but we've also been talking about prophecy of the future and how God uses dreams to get across his plan for the future. I want to recommend a video to you along that same line. It's called Don't Worry, because today was yesterday's future. And I hope you enjoy it. We'll continue our study in Daniel next week. Until then, God bless you.